We have a very special 6-week series we are starting, and it's going to be on Tana's new book, The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. I'm so excited about the launch of this book. And we're really going to talk about overcoming anxiety, depression, trauma, and grief. And we have an event, a live event coming December 12th. It's free. We'll tell you how to sign up for it. But this is a book that I'm just so proud of Tana for writing.
I just want to mention, for people who sign up for the events, you have to stay to the end because we're going to have a question that you're going to have to answer at the end. You'll be entered into a drawing to win an evaluation at Amen Clinics.
Yeah, no, that's a big deal. A lot of people who listen to the podcast either came to the clinics or want to come to the clinics. And I'm also so happy to announce the podcast has now over 10 million downloads.
Big deal. Yeah.
So we are thrilled that you listen or watch. But, you know, it's a book I sort of nudged her to write for a long time.
That's a gentle word.
Because Tana's story is probably a bit like your story, and how she has embraced it and overcame it. I mean, it's always a process, right?
Oh,
yeah. But the lessons from the relentless courage of a scared child, I am certain can help you. So before we get into it, though, we have winners.
Yes.
And we're going to choose 2 this week. Today is A New Look at Life by Danielle, MS-19. Dr. Daniel and Tana Amen have really opened my eyes to my health. I've been struggling with my physical and mental health since I was a kid. That sounds familiar. The podcast keeps me interested. I love listening to it. There's so many great topics being discussed that make me want to learn more. I'm interested in having my brain scanned to find out more about what I've been experiencing, and hoping to get a better understanding why I feel and think the way I do. I am excited for the future, and I really hope that what Dr. Amen is doing spreads like wildfire. We have wildfires here in Southern California. And more people invest in their own brain health.
Love that.
So Danielle, MS, you are one of our winners. And my team will reach out to you. You can either get a copy of my new book or Tana's new book.
Yeah. So the next one, we have Sarah McClanahan. So I'm currently a school counselor, and I'm always looking for ways to help my kiddos and make myself better. This podcast has truly opened my eyes to brain health and how to also help my family. I'm also reading one of his books. I think that means. I'm so excited. I'm obsessed. From a counseling perspective, I cannot believe I'm just now finding out about Dr. Amen. He's the real deal. I love that. It's fantastic.
Well, speaking of the real deal, so you open The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child with, I remember this day like it's yesterday, and you're pretty mad at me.
Yeah, I was mad at you. I was mad at God. I felt like I was being pushed to do something that I didn't want to do. We were speaking, I was asked to help change the menu at the Salvation Army, and you were going to be helping the people. And then Laura, who is just an amazing human, took my my 12-week class. When I wrote the Omni Diet, she took the 12-week class, and she got so healthy that she realized she needed to plant this in the Salvation Army to get them healthy. That if their physical health wasn't right, they were never going to beat their addiction. Like it was going to be much harder. So I'm like, yeah, I'll do the menu. And she said, no, not the menu. I really need you to work with the people like you worked with me, with us in your class. And all of a sudden I was like, no, I didn't agree to do that. Like, this isn't what I agreed to do. And I didn't realize until that moment just how judgmental I was. And so we were driving home from one of their events. She's like, come to our event. Just come see what the people are all about. This is a graduation ceremony. They're going to talk about their accomplishments, their struggles or challenges, what they've overcome. And I went, and I hated myself for being not more empathic or empathetic. I hated myself for being sort of angry through the whole thing and feeling almost scared. And so I remember sort of clutching my purse to me, and I'm listening to these people, and it felt to me like they were making light of their situation. Now, keep in mind, they've been in this program for over a year. So probably it was a big journey for them too, but that's not what I saw. And so we leave the event, and we get in the car, and I started crying, which I don't do very often.
Not very often. No, she's not a crier.
And I said, God just picked the wrong person this time. I can't do this. And you said, no, God picked the perfect person. And between you and Laura, you can both be very persuasive. I ended up working with these people, but the first time I went to talk to them, there's over 200 people in the audience, because there were the people who were residents, but then there were also some family members, and so there were a lot of people there. Staff, and it's probably more like 300 people. And I'm on stage, and I'm thinking, how am I going to reach these people? I can see them looking at me like, why are you here? And I'm looking at them thinking, why am I here? And so this isn't going to work. How am I going to teach them something when I don't like these people? And I realized I don't like these people. And so I kept just thinking of them as those addicts, or, I was labeling them in my head. And so I said a quick prayer. I mean, I'm a nurse. I'm a mother. I'm a nurse. It's not like I've loads of life experience. I should be more evolved than this. And I know that I can fighting with myself. So I say a quick prayer as I'm walking on stage, and I'm like, God, please let me just use me to teach one person one thing in this audience, if it's possible. And all of a sudden I have this epiphany. I'm looking out at these people, and it just hit me. They were scared children, just like I was at one point. Like, we were all just scared children. And I don't know why some turned right and some turned left. That's just above my pay grade. But it hit me that if I could go back to that time where we all had that in common, where we were all just kids, that scared child inside, even now, that maybe I could help the next generation and the one after that. And it was just this huge epiphany. And you would think it would be easy after that, but it wasn't, because a woman in the audience looked at me and she raises her hand. She goes, what would you know about my life? Look at you. Your life is perfect. And it was like someone slapped me. And I'm like, here, I thought I made all this, I had this amazing epiphany. This is going to be beautiful. And I realized in that moment, she was seeing exactly what I wanted her to see, a facade. Took years to build that facade. So why would I suddenly expect that they were going to see through it? And so I stepped back, and I just said, how many of you are judging me right now? And nobody raised their hand at first. And I'm like, no, how many of you are judging me? Because I'm judging you. And so I raised my hand, and eventually they started raising their hands. And I just said, so let me tell you about a scared little girl. Her name is Tana.
That's so beautiful. And I've heard this story over and over again.
But when I told them my life story, we suddenly had this bond. And the next 2 years were just beautiful.
And when I first met you, you were not telling anybody this story. But when you share authentically about who you are, you bond, you can connect to people. And that's one of the most beautiful parts of the relentless courage of a scared child. So you can pre-order the book, relentlesscourage.com, and you can sign up for the event at tanaamen.com/event. And at the event, we're going to raffle off an evaluation.
We have great speakers. Clinics. I mean, in addition to you, who is amazing, we've got JJ Virgin, we have Pastor Derwin Gray, Pastor Miles McPherson, Carolyn Leaf. I mean, it's going to be an amazing event. There's going to be so many takeaways that are just practical for people. Now,
write down what you learned. We're going to come back and we're going to do more with the Salvation Army story. I mean, spectacular. Write down what you learned, post it on any of your social media sites, take a picture of it, post it, and then go to brainwarriorswaypodcast.com, leave us comments, questions, or reviews, and we'll enter you into a drawing to win one of our books. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are still here talking about my journey in my memoir, The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. And we're talking about the lessons that I learned along the way that I wanted to share with people, and just the process, which wasn't an easy one to write, but just I'm enjoying so much now.
And, we left off at the Salvation Army, where this woman raises her hand and said, "How would you know about my life?" And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, they were pretty shocked.
You know way more.
Yeah, they were pretty shocked.
Their lives. And you talked about the scared child.
Yeah.
In fact, I wanted to call the book One Less Scared Child, because I love this story so much. And I love the title. The title is actually better, Relentless Courage, because you'll see through the book the different challenges a scared child had to face. But, one of the first lessons, I think, is when you argue with God.
You lose.
You lose. Or
no, if you win an argument with God, you lose. If you lose an argument with God, you win. And so that was one of the lessons. And I think what really came to me, because I ended up really bonding with these people. And I mean, I knew that I had grown when I went grocery shopping with a gangbanger, and just loved it, and just came to really appreciate him and what he was going through. And if you know my story, that's hard. That was hard for me. At one point, I wouldn't have been able to do that, just because of my self-protection.
As you started, you wouldn't have been able to.
No, my self-protective, facade and mechanisms would have just kept me from doing that. But, I learned that it's easy to call people bad. It's harder to ask why.
And when you grow up in trauma, and so now we should tell them a little bit about the trauma, you become judgmental because you've been hurt. You have been scared. And so
I had this weird teeter-totter of how I handled it. It was like, on one side, I had this facade, like nobody was going to see through it as long as I look, put together, as long as the makeup's on, the hair is done, as long as I'm successful, in my career, nobody's going to notice. But on the other side, I put out this very tough. So if you, like, when you mentioned ADD, I'm like, ADD is nonsense. Or if you said, you were traumatized, or you just said something about me being molested, I'm like, I wasn't molested. And like, I couldn't acknowledge the past trauma. I was very tough on the outside. Problem is, I was actually suffering still on the inside, even as an adult, and couldn't tell anyone. And I was suffering silently with an eating disorder, just off and on for years. So, and I would manage it in all sorts of weird ways, and I would white knuckle it, and I would use exercise, but I never really got to the core issue and couldn't tell anyone.
And so let's just tell them a little bit about what you told that audience about the scared child. So people really understand why the book is called The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child.
So my first memory that I remember clearly was almost drowning when I was 2. And then my dog saved me, which is why there's a dog on the cover. I just was in love with my German Shepherd. He saved my life. And then my next memory was the day that my uncle was murdered. And I remember my mother and my grandmother falling to the floor screaming. And when I tried to like run over and like, mommy, mommy, I love you, I got pushed away. Of course, I couldn't realize they were trying to protect me, but I was shoved aside. And so I figured out then that like hiding was safer, like just not being seen, fly under the radar, don't speak up. If you go hide in your room, build a little pillow fort, like no one will see me.
She still builds the pillow fort every night. She builds the pillow
Yeah, I
fort.
still sleep with like 6 pillows. And so
I'm like, where are you?
So I think I sort of lost my voice at that time. I became very timid for a long time. It took me a long time to find my voice again. And it was always, our house was always like, when is the next thing around the corner going to jump out at you? It was never just a peaceful place. There was always yelling, screaming. My dad left when I was 2 months old. My uncle, who was a heroin addict, lived with us. He's not the one that was murdered, by the way.
But it was because of him.
Yeah, because of his connections and yeah. And so there was, we had strangers living in our house. Like my mom wanted to rescue people that just all of a sudden there'd be people in our house. And it was just a little crazy. My mom was a 16-year-old runaway who never finished high school, but she's tough and she was determined to, we were going to survive. So, and then some of my trauma was self-induced later on. I mean, let's be honest.
But let's stay, because one of the things that happened when you're 4 years old, so your uncle's murdered in a drug deal gone wrong, very upsetting for you, your mother, your grandmother. And then all of a sudden, you're having stomach issues.
Yeah, I'm 4 years old and I'm in the hospital having upper and lower GIs. I don't know where. I mean, I was always
And I
sick.
remember like one of our early dates, you were, I told me about your uncle and then you told me about the stomach issues.
You're like, don't you think they're connected? And I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. That's psychobabble.
So a lot of what's going on with you physically may have historical connections, and knowing about them and then reprocessing them from an adult perspective can just be so helpful.
Well, and now that I've really done a lot of work, and a lot of people think that I do my work and write my books to help others, which I'm glad I turned that pain to purpose, but I went on that journey to heal myself, to save myself. Because now I actually realize I was always sick as a kid. I was always on antibiotics, always going to the hospital, high fevers. I had mono, had my tonsils out. I mean, it was just like one thing after another.
So your immune system.
And I think it was the stress.
Trashed.
Yeah.
And some of your best friends were the tiger, the leprechaun, and the cat.
Oh yeah. My mom was just doing the best she could. And she didn't know. So she was just, whatever food she could put on the table is what she was putting on the table. And she's off and running to work.
Well, I think those of us that also grew up in the 50s and 60s, like I did, our parents had no clue. And so Frosted Flakes and Aunt Jemima pancake syrup.
But when that's your breakfast and your dinner, and you're having school lunch.
I mean, it's a bad thing for anybody, right, to get loaded with that much sugar. But we already listening to chronic stress,
right,
intense trauma, antibiotics, which also damage your microbiome, right? For those of you who are brain warriors, I hope you're listening to the story through the brain warrior's way. It's no wonder that when you're 23, you get diagnosed with cancer. Yeah. So it's like not a big surprise when you understand the history. So as we go over the next 6 weeks and we talk through the book, we'll also give a commentary on how it fits with the Brain Warriors Way podcast. And, we're like up to 4 years old. And,
right. And we haven't even gotten into, teenage years yet.
We will. Right. Stay with us. There's a lot coming. And I remember because, when we first met, I just adored you. Right. I mean, you're beautiful, you're smart, and I'm listening to the history and I'm like, EMDR, I'm going to give
Oh yeah,
you
my
10
first
sessions
gift,
of-
my first gift, only a psychiatrist would give as a first gift.
She almost canceled her first date.
Oh yeah, because I wanted a psychiatrist. I wanted to be psychoanalyzed.
Yeah.
But my
she
first
desperately needed it, by the way. I mean, this is obvious here. And
my first gift was 10 sessions of EMDR. I was like, okay. And I was not, and I walked into the office and I'm like, I'm not going to bang my head up against a wall for 3 years and tell you how screwed up my mother is. So this needs to work fast.
Which is why I knew, because she's a neurosurgical ICU nurse. It's like, come on, let's get this done.
Right.
And it was
life
transformative.
changing. Yeah.
Right. And in the book, there are lots of lessons, but recognizing, remembering, and then processing. So that's the beautiful thing about EMDR, which is different than most therapies. You just don't go and talk about how stressful your childhood is you process it. And then you see, well, what are the good things that happen because of that? And a lot of Tana's strength is really built on the trauma that she has experienced. And again, I'm just so proud of you.
Thank you. And you can pre-order the book at relentlesscourage.com. It's pretty much sold wherever books are sold, but for pre-ordering, relentlesscourage.com or Amazon.
And there are all sorts of gifts.
Oh yeah, like over $400 worth of gifts. And one of my favorite is the course we created. So it's just an amazing course. It's not long, it's not burdensome, but it's very impactful. So we have a video course that we created for you.
And there's worksheets and
journaling. There's a digital journal and all sorts of fun stuff. And then
come to the event and send the link, tanaamen.com/event to all the people you know that have struggled with trauma. And guess what? During the pandemic, it's all of us. I
didn't plan for this book to be released at this time, or I didn't know that there was going to be a pandemic. I finished my first draft right when the pandemic hit, right when quarantine hit. And I was like, whoa, I mean, timing, I don't believe in coincidence. So it was a little weird. Yeah.
My goodness. All right. Leave us a comment, question, or review at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. What did you learn? And I think, one of the big lessons you talked about just now is it's easy to call people back. It's harder to ask why.
Yeah,
that would be a great lesson to write down, post on any of your social media sites. If you got another lesson, please do that.
When I heard some of the stories, when I really got to know some of the people at the Salvation Army and I heard their stories, what they went through as kids, I'm like, wow. I mean, it really changes how you see people. And I began to see people who suffered rather than addicts. I began to see people who were just struggling to get by.
And we're doing way too much labeling in our society now. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're liberal, you're conservative. Mm-hmm. You're this ethnic group or not. And we need to stop that because all of our genes are 99.97% similar. Mm-hmm. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Amen. In the end of mental illness, I talk about, well, what if we reimagine mental health as brain health? And this one idea changes everything. Welcome back. We are so excited you're with us, and
grateful.
Both Tana and I are grateful you're allowing us to talk about her new book, The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. And, there's so many lessons from that Salvation Army story. I want to talk about more, but I have another review I want to read first. And I love this, Mom Brain. I have so many people telling me that when they had a baby, their brain completely
I had
changed.
Pregnancy dementia. No one ever told me it wasn't going to go away.
So this is from Jamie, 4658. I enjoy listening and learning. I'd love to hear your opinions about mom brain and how the brain changes after motherhood, as well as any healthy tips on how to handle the stress and anxiety motherhood may bring.
Yeah, we need to do a whole series on hormones, because I actually did a presentation today for him on that very topic, because that was such a big thing for me. So,
any quick tips?
It's normal that it happens. It actually is a biological thing. Your brain prunes itself when you get pregnant. And so it changes, your chemistry changes. And part of that is done so that you nest, so that you will do anything to protect your nest. You'll put up with way more than you ever did before, or ever will again after you have empty nest syndrome. Because guess what? It's going to change again when you go through menopause. And it's going to prune itself again, and you're going to become more testosterone dominant. Where before your female hormones were more dominant when you have children. Now your female hormones are going to drop, testosterone is going to be more dominant, and you're going to tell people, you know what, forget you, I'm doing it my way. But knowing that is important, because now you can begin to recognize that's what's happening. It's not that everybody's trying to irritate you, it's that your brain is changing. So if you don't want to end up divorced, pay attention.
So as you're starting into menopause, I guess I should be really careful.
Well, and that's the thing, is I'm aware of it. So for me, I take hormones. Not everybody wants to take hormones. That's a personal choice between you and your doctor. But when I heard that, and when I heard that everybody thinks that divorces are filed during middle age because of men, but it's not true. It's the women who are filing because they're just done.
75%.
They're done. And so when I heard that, I'm like, whoa, okay, I need to be aware of my own behavior during this time.
Well, let's stay married for sure.
Yes.
So
when I go in the room and close the door, he knows. If I'm like, just today is not a good day, you need to just he's like, oh, okay. I mean, he's very cooperative, so it's good.
All right. So back to the Salvation Army story and working with these addicts. And, I think one of the big lessons is they only had 85 cents a day to feed them.
Yeah.
And they were basically feeding them a toxic diet,
right,
of simple carbohydrates.
And they weren't aware of it. I mean, the intentions are always good, right?
But this is happening in virtually every
school,
addiction
hospital,
treatment center,
right? Addiction treatment centers
in the world, and
prisons.
They already come with a damaged brain because of the substance abuse damages the brain, right? Anybody who's been paying attention to this podcast knows, alcohol is not a health food. Marijuana is not going green. This stuff damages your brain. And so if you're trying to get better, which comes from a series of decisions to be better, and yet they're perpetuating brain damage with toxic food. That's why Laura, who had followed me for years, she'd come to my lectures and, we became friends. She got convicted about what she was feeding her beneficiaries. And it was terrible, like all drug treatment programs. And you really help them change on a budget.
Right. No, on a really tight budget. So that's why when people write to me and they're like, I want to eat healthy, but I can't. I'm like, look, you can. I promise you, I've written numerous blogs on this, on how to eat healthy on a budget. You might not be shopping, at the most expensive gourmet stores and buying everything organic, but you can do this. There are ways to do this. And I write about it extensively. So in Brain Warriors Way, I write about it. In the cookbook, I write about it, because it's one of the number one barriers in people's minds. And that's what I want you to get today. It's in your mind. If you actually have the tips and the tools, you can do this. And oh, by the way, if you are struggling with your mood, if you're struggling with trauma, like I did, with past trauma, if you're struggling with things like eating disorders, if you're struggling with things like those issues, your nutrition and your lifestyle choices and your decision-making is critical to your healing. And I didn't know that at the time. When I went through and I did several hundred hours of metabolic medicine. And when I realized the connection between food and my mood. And I realized everything I put on the end of my fork matters. I don't ever want to be so depressed again that I want to die, because I've been there. When I realized that it actually affects, compulsive behavior, it affects depression, it affects anxiety. Where was that information when I was growing up?
And you went to an eating disorder program.
I did. And I never went back. I was like, I'm not going to, because I felt like I got labeled as defective as opposed to just teaching me how to handle my anxiety. For me, the eating disorder, I think eating disorders are always different. But for me, it was more about managing my anxiety, and it was a form of control over the chaos all around me. And
well, we're going to get to the eating disorder, to the molestation, to cancer, depression, to your crazy father. We're going to get to all of that. I want us to spend a few minutes and talk some more about you working with the people at the Salvation Army and just how pivotal it was to open up and tell your story. Because I think what it really did is it connected you.
Oh, they were shocked. They were shocked. I had people coming up to me afterwards going, I had no idea. I never would have known. And I'm like, well, of course you wouldn't have known, because I spent all this time building this wall. So, and that's when I realized
it was a defense mechanism against pain.
And it began to crumble at that point. That's when it started.
It was a defense mechanism against pain. And then you actually started to connect
a lot
with them.
Yeah. No, I really liked them. I really cared. Yeah. It was really interesting. I had so many amazing stories, just life-changing stories. A woman who had lost her kids because of her drug use. They were taken from her. The gangbanger I went grocery shopping with. Just so many moments that I had where I was able to not just connect with them, but teach them the tools I had learned. And I, in a million years, would never have guessed that the pain that I went through, the depression I went through, the wanting to die, all the icky, ugly stuff that I had to, unpack in order to get well, that would be the thing. Those would be the things, that pain would be the thing that would actually become my purpose in life. So rather than running from it, it was almost like God was going, let me use this. Let me help you use this for good.
And part of being able to do that was the therapy you went through, right? That realizing you're not alone.
I'm not a victim.
A lot of people go through trauma. Yeah. There's estimated 20 million Americans have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like 7.5% of the population, probably now since the pandemic. And there's certain things you can do that help, and there's certain things you do that absolutely don't help,
right? That
make things worse. So you were able, and you remember any of the tips for the food that they could do it on a budget?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's, it's pretty extensive. It would take more than a few minutes. It's in the Brainware's Way. I write about it extensively. You can also get it on my website at tanaamen.com. But use, first of all, well, you need to I categorize things for people who are really on a budget, A, B, C. It's like, these are the things that you need to buy that are organic, that are grass-fed. They're the most toxic, the most dangerous. The next one is okay, we can give a little bit on this because it's not quite as, this is not going to hurt you as much. And then C is we don't need to go organic on these. So you can go to environmentalworkinggroup.org and you can get the clean 15 and the dirty dozen that will tell you which ones you need to focus on being organic. I mean, I'm going to go off for 2 hours if we start this, but if you go to my website, all those tools are there. In the Brainware's Way cookbook, the tools are there. It teaches you how to use your leftovers without tossing them, how to shop, and I have grocery lists on my website so that you don't buy things you don't need and you don't buy extra. So it actually helps you with exactly the amounts you need for each meal. I mean, there's just, people waste more food than they think. So, and that's what was discovered, is that the reason people are spending so much money on healthy food is because, it's a little more expensive, but it's mostly because people are wasting most of it. They're not using it effectively.
Well, I mean, Trader Joe's, for example, has these great chicken thighs, hormone-free,
Walmart free, has.
And they're not expensive. at all.
Walmart and Costco now have a ton of stuff.
Yeah. So you can do this because we really didn't increase the amount of money they spent.
No, we couldn't.
Because that they didn't have any more.
No.
And what I loved was the excitement that once they realized if I change my diet, I think better.
Mm-hmm.
I lose weight. And I remember they'd come up to you with their pants.
Huge pants. And one of them was so great. One of them came up to me and he goes, I finally have a six pants. He has these giant pants and he's really, in pretty good shape at that point. He was exercising and he's got these giant pants that used to be his. And he goes, I finally have a six pack, but the kind that won't get me arrested. It was really cute. They actually had really good sense of humor. And they were really great.
When we come back, I want you to talk about Thomas and that story. It's just a story I'll never forget. And we have an event coming up free December 12th.
We really hope you'll join us.
We're going to give away an evaluation at one of the Amen clinics at the end. You have to stay to the end. Great speakers, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, Pastor Miles McPherson, Pastor Derwin Gray, and it's not, we have pastors because we love them and they are masterful at dealing with trauma.
Well, one of the reasons that I just had to have Derwin Gray there is because I heard his story and, it's you wouldn't think that I'd be so connected to him. I just felt this immediate affinity to him. He's, this Black pastor that grew up in the South and he grew up in a pretty toxic environment, really toxic environment. And the minute I heard his story, I just felt connected to him. And I'm not exactly sure why. Yeah. So, but I had to have him speak because he is just magnificent at taking pain and just, turning it around for people and giving you hope.
And Pastor Miles McPherson is the senior pastor at The Rock in San Diego, one of the fastest growing churches, who wrote a book called The Third Option.
Yeah, that's why we wanted
which is amazing about how to deal with the racial divide.
And we've had some pretty great conversations, raw, hard conversations, but they're so necessary and it's been so great. So I wanted to share that.
So December 12th, please sign up for it. Send the link to all of your friends. And you can also go to relentlesscourage.com. And if you pre-order the book at Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or anywhere great books are sold, Tana has a whole list of gifts for you, including a video course that she and I created specifically for you. So stay with us. Welcome back. We're so glad that you're with us. Don't forget the event, December 12th. Order Tana's new book. Please send it to your friends. Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. Relentlesscourage.com and get all those free gifts. Before we go back and finish the Salvation Army story, I want to read this testimonial. It's called Love from Manjo 2020. I've been listening to your podcast for almost 2 years now. We have a young family friend that was struggling with a possible brain injury, and they were abusing drugs and alcohol for years. I asked the parents to please check out your facility in Bellevue, up by Seattle, Washington. They did, and their teenager had a brain scan, and you guys were able to pinpoint the issue. Now this teenage child is a young adult and doing very well. I wish more people chose your facility for brain health. Thank you so much for your amazing brain health information. Well, that made me feel good.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Like this next story makes me feel good. So one of my favorite stories is Thomas. And it's sort of one of the main reasons why you wrote The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. Somebody you were extremely judgmental about to start. I mean, he was a gangbanger. He lost his children, but he failed his GED 3 times.
Right.
This is really important to know, because easy to call people dumb, easy to call people bad, easy to say, try harder. If only you tried harder, you'd do better. But he couldn't focus, right? And it'd actually been easy to diagnose him with ADD.
Well, we found 70% of them had either been diagnosed and were untreated, or had been told they had ADD by someone and never followed through.
And untreated ADD is throughout your book, right?
My
From
family.
your mother and your uncle and you, and nobody knew about it. And often in untreated ADD families, there's a history of trauma, sexual abuse, drug abuse, and the kind of crazy life that you grew up in. And so Thomas failed his GED 3 times, was depressed, hopeless, had just no positive thoughts.
He said he didn't really understand the reason for living. And when he said that, I was like, wow, that's how I felt at one time. There's just no purpose for living.
And when you put these strategies into his life, from eating better and thinking
And exercise.
better and exercise, he lost how much weight?
85 pounds.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
And got reconnected to his children.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote you this beautiful letter on graduation.
And yeah, in the letter he said that he always thought he was stupid, but then he realized that he wasn't stupid, that he couldn't focus because of the way that he was living his life, especially the food. He never had any idea how much food mattered. And so he passed his GED. And so that was really exciting. And he was so proud of himself. And so he said, now I have energy, I have focus, I have excitement for life. He was just so happy. And he ends it by saying, my life was a mess. Now it's a message. I've been tested. Now I have a testimony. I was a victim. Now I'm victorious. I've been through trials and now I'm triumphant. And it was just, yeah, I couldn't read that for years without crying. It was amazing.
And it adds a completely different look to failure. That, again,
I don't like that word.
I don't like
that word.
Easy to call people bad, easy to make them feel guilty, to shame them, much harder to go why. So
the failure is the F word in my mind. So I don't like using the word failure, because even though people say, oh, it's in my failures that I learn, you're still planting in your head that you were a failure. And I don't like it. I like falling. So as a martial artist, I like the idea that, we learn how to fall safely and get up quickly. And it's a normal part of practicing martial arts. It's an expected part of martial arts. It's just part of what we do. You just learn how to do it safely and how to get up quickly, and you learn what not to do next time. It's a requirement almost. So rather than failing, we fall. And the only time you fail is if you don't get up again.
And it's one of the major principles of my work. Whenever I evaluate a new patient, I always go to my whiteboard and I draw this graph. It's like, when people first come to see me, they're not doing well, but they have good days and bad days. So it's like this little sawtooth line. And then we intervene, like you intervened with Thomas and the other people at the Salvation Army, and they get better. But nobody ever gets better, just gets better, right? They're better, and then not so much, and then better still, and then not so much. And it's actually when you fall back, if you can be curious about it, about what happened, and not furious and give up, then you can create strategies around the vulnerable times to continue making progress on your journey.
I mean, essentially, that's exactly what we do in martial arts. And that's why I love it so much. So you fall, you get hit, whatever happens, you fall down, you get up and you literally dissect it, you analyze it, and you're like, what can I do differently next time? And you come up with a strategy, and it's actually pretty cool. So, and there's something about that for me as a female. Females are just like so hardwired for some bizarre reason to be perfectionistic. And so,
because your emotional brain works way too hard.
Okay, well, whatever it is, it's
don't you remember?
Painful.
I published a study on 46,000 scans looking at the difference between male and female brains. And males tend to have sleepier brains because we hit soccer balls with our head and play tackle football and drink too much. But the female brain, because of estrogen and progesterone, their limbic or emotional brain works really hard.
Yeah.
And it sets them up to be able to raise children and multitask. But it also leaves you with the vulnerability of needing to be perfect in order to feel good at all. And I think that's one of the things you had struggled with.
Right. And that's one of the things that for me, it was all sort of together. I was doing therapy, and I found martial arts, which I loved. It was a great outlet. There's nothing better than hitting big padded guys for releasing tension and stress. It's just amazing. So yeah, there's just something about it. It releases these endorphins. That's just like, it's awesome. But I had this light switch moment, and I'm like, I've been spending my whole life thinking I can't fall. And when I did fall, because you can't go through life not falling. So when I would fall, I would just fall apart, literally. So it was so hard for me to get back up. I felt it as this like personal failure, and it was just embarrassing. And I felt, this self-loathing, and it's like, how silly is that? So in martial arts, just the idea that this is normal. It's like a requirement basically to learn how to do it safely and get up quickly. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to apply that to my life. So it was really helpful.
It's such an important lesson that you talk about in the book. And, when it comes to Thomas and people like Thomas, you realize, well, it's not just about them. It's about generations of them.
Yeah. I mean, his 6 kids, the gang unit busted his door in and took his 6 kids away from him. And so are Thomas's kids going to be better off if Thomas gets well and is able to create some stability for them, or are they going to just follow in the same footsteps? And that's what happened in my family. So I, by some miracle, was, able to figure out a path, not easily. It was sort of like life and oncoming traffic for a while, but I was able to figure out this path to wellness. But I have 2 half sisters that sort of didn't. And so, the generational part of this is really important. So this generational
and people
component.
Listening to the podcast know that our 2 nieces live with us, and we adore them because we don't want for them what happened with their mom and dad.
And they're really good
and
kids.
Their mom and dad are working to be better.
Fortunately, yeah, they really are.
4 years ago, they were taken by Child Protective Service. And, the progress these girls have made is just incredible.
Well, and through us, the progress that their parents have made is also pretty incredible. But it's, without some guidance, without some plan, it's like we just blindly continue these cycles. And that was one of the reasons, that was one of the motivations, because I'm not going to say that it was not a painful decision to decide to get well. I'm not going to say that. It was a painful decision. When I decided to do it, you unpack a lot of stuff. And I often equate it to boil popping. It's like all this ugly stuff comes out. And I was resistant to even starting that process. I knew it wasn't going to be easy.
I know, you almost canceled your first day with me.
Yeah, and I left you a couple times because I was
ripped my heart out.
So
we're not going to think about that right now.
But
I don't want to be unhappy.
But when I made that decision I wasn't willing to get married again unless I knew I was healthy again. Like or healthy. Like I knew I needed to do some work. So when I made the decision to get well, I knew it was going to be hard, but I kept thinking to myself, fortunately, I think I have the gift of introspection. So I kept thinking to myself, if I don't do this, I'm going to repeat the cycle that I went through, not intentionally, but I had a young child And so I had a toddler, and I'm like, that's really was a big motivator for me, was that I just could not imagine putting her through a life of pain. And so I just really wanted to be a good mother. I mean, sometimes getting help is not about you, right? It's okay. Whatever it is, just do it. And so that for me was huge. And it was worth the pain every time I would look at her and go, I'm going to make her life better. My mom made my life better than hers. I mean, imagine that. I have a book. My mom made my life better than hers was. That's pretty crazy to think about. But I was determined to make my daughter's life much better than mine, that she wasn't going to grow up with just constant chaos and screaming and drama and, people breaking in the house and guns going off in the house and, stuff like that.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about Tana's childhood and some of the trauma and how that's informed some of the decisions she made later in her life. Leave us a comment, question, or review at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. We'll enter you into a drawing to win one of our books. Also, what did you learn in this podcast? Write it down. Post it on any of your social media sites. We'd be so grateful. #BrainWarriorsWay podcast.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.